Terrence Maddox found her on a Tuesday. He didn't knock. He didn't call. He simply appeared outside the window of Noir Han at 11:40 at night, standing in the falling snow with his hands in his coat pockets, watching Aaliyah stack chairs through the glass like she was something he'd misplaced and finally tracked down. She saw him before he moved. Her body knew him before her mind caught up. The way your hand pulls back from a hot stove before you've consciously registered the burn. 3 months she'd been invisible. 3 months she'd eaten cold rice in a 600-square-foot room in Queens and worn the same 4 work shirts on rotation and told herself that disappearing was the same thing as being safe. Terrence smiled through the glass and lifted 2 fingers. A lazy wave. "Hey, baby, found you." Aaliyah's hand knocked over the chair she was holding. The crash brought her boss out of his office. And that moment, that specific collision of the man she was running from and the man she was running toward without knowing it, was the moment everything in Aaliyah Monroe's life stopped moving in one direction and started moving in another. If you've ever stood in a room and felt the walls close in from 2 sides at once, you already know exactly what she felt. Subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end. Hit the like button, drop a comment with your city or your country. I want to see how far this story travels. And don't go anywhere, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about power, protection, and what it really means to be free. The shift started at 10 in the morning, and it was supposed to end at 9. It never ended at 9. Aaliyah had been working doubles at Noir Han for 6 weeks straight, not because the schedule demanded it, but because the alternative was sitting alone in her room listening to the radiator knock and thinking about things she was trying not to think about. Work kept her body occupied. It kept her face pointed forward. It kept her from doing the math on how many more months it would take before she had enough saved to stop feeling like one bad week away from nothing. She was 28 years old and she was starting over. Again. That knowledge sat in her chest like a stone she'd learned to carry rather than put down. She didn't talk about it. Didn't explain it to the other waitstaff, who were mostly college kids treating Noir Han like a gap year stop. She smiled at the right moments and remembered orders without writing them down and refilled water glasses before customers noticed they were low. She was good at the job the way people get good at things when they have no margin for being bad at them. Noir Han itself was the kind of place that made you feel slightly underdressed regardless of what you were wearing. The lighting was low and deliberate. The menu was Korean-American fusion, real fusion. Not the cheap kind, where the influence ran all the way through rather than just sitting on top. The clientele was money without announcing it, the specific kind of wealthy that doesn't need to perform. Everything in the restaurant communicated control and taste and an almost aggressive sense of restraint. That restraint came from the owner. Kwon Si-jae was 41 and ran Noir. On the way, he apparently ran everything, quietly, completely, and with no visible effort. He was in the restaurant most nights, not supervising in any obvious way, but present in the background of things. He wore dark suits that fit like they were made specifically for his body, which they almost certainly were. He didn't engage with staff beyond necessity. He wasn't unkind. He simply wasn't interested in warmth as a management style. He gave clear instructions once and expected them followed. He noticed mistakes without making scenes about them. Aaliyah had worked for him for 3 months, and their total combined conversation amounted to maybe 12 sentences. She preferred it that way. She was not in the market for complicated men who watched things carefully. The double shift on that particular Tuesday in January had been brutal in the quiet way bad shifts sometimes are. Not because anything went dramatically wrong, but because everything was slightly off in ways too small to complain about. The kitchen ran slow. One of the other servers called in sick, and they never got a replacement. A table of 8 came in at 7:30 and didn't leave until 9:15, by which time Aaliyah's lower back had stopped sending pain signals and simply gone to a dull, numb protest. By 10:15, the last customer was gone. By 10:40, she'd finished her side work. Outside, the snow that had been threatening since afternoon had finally committed. She checked her phone standing at the service station near the back. The transit app showed what she already suspected. The Q58 connection she needed had stopped running, which meant the combination of buses she depended on to get from Midtown back to her room in Queens was now a puzzle missing its key piece. There was one more option, the M15 to a transfer, but that would leave her standing outside in a storm for 20 minutes at a corner in Long Island City with nothing but a thin work coat and the particular kind of cold that January in New York reserves for people who can't afford to be cold. She could afford a cab about as well as she could afford to fly there. She stood at the service station running the numbers in her head. She'd spent $11 at lunch because she'd been too hungry to be sensible, which left her at a balance she was not going to count right now because counting it would require her to feel something she didn't want to feel on a Tuesday night in a restaurant that was closing. "You still here?" Marcus from the kitchen was pulling his coat on. 23, lived in the Bronx, caught the 4 train without thinking about it. "Yeah," she said. "Bus thing. I'll figure it out." "Uber?" She gave him. He got it. "Okay. Be safe out there." He pushed through the back door and the sound of the wind came in briefly before it shut. Aaliyah put her phone away and looked at the door. She looked at it for a long time. She walked to her locker, got her coat and her bag, wrapped her scarf twice around her neck because twice was barely enough, and went out through the employee's entrance. The cold hit her like a physical thing, like a hand pressed flat against her face. The snow was coming sideways now, the kind of snow that doesn't fall so much as a tack. She made it to the corner of the building and stopped. The next bus wasn't coming for 40 minutes. 40 minutes in this was not survivable in any comfortable sense. She could manage it, probably. She was not going to fall over. But she was also standing on a midtown sidewalk at 11 o'clock in a January storm in a work coat that had been adequate in October, thinking about 40 minutes, and something inside her simply wouldn't move forward. She stood there for a moment that stretched out longer than it should have. Then she went back. The employee's entrance was locked. She tried it twice. Then 3 times, in case she'd done something wrong the first 2 times, which she hadn't. She pressed her face toward the glass panel beside the door and could see the light in the back hallway, the one that stayed on all night. She could see the storage shelves in the corner of the time clock station. She knocked, waited, knocked harder. Nothing. She went around to the front. The main entrance was locked, the interior dark except for the low ambient lighting they left on for security. She pressed her palm against the glass and looked in, and the dining room sat empty and perfect and completely indifferent to her. She was cold in a way that was starting to be frightening rather than merely uncomfortable. She went back around to the employee's entrance, and that was where she was standing when she saw a light move in the back hallway. Someone still inside. She knocked again, harder than was dignified, and pressed close to the glass. The figure that came down the hallway was not one of the kitchen staff. Kwon Si-jae stopped on the other side of the door and looked at her. She had, at that moment, exactly 0 capacity for embarrassment or professional composure. Her teeth were doing something involuntary, and her fingers had lost the articulate quality of actual fingers and become something more like mittens attached to her hands, and she pressed one of them against the glass. "Please," she said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Don't lock me out." Si-jae looked at her for a moment that felt longer than it probably was. Then he unlocked the door. The warm air came out to meet her before she'd even finished stepping inside, and she stood in the back hallway of Noir Han, feeling her face start to thaw, and the specific kind of shaky feeling that comes after cold rather than during it. Si-jae had already stepped back to give her room. He wasn't touching her or hovering. He was simply standing there in his shirt sleeves, the jacket gone, the cuffs rolled up, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Bus," she managed. He didn't ask for elaboration. "Come inside," he said, and turned and walked back toward the interior of the restaurant. She followed him, because there was nothing else to do. He took her through the kitchen and into a short hallway she'd never been down before, which opened into a small room that turned out to be a private staff lounge. Not the cramped employee break room with the plastic chairs and the dying microwave, but an actual room with a proper couch and a low table and a space heater in the corner that he switched on without ceremony. On a shelf along one wall there were folded items, spare staff shirts, a pair of sweatpants still in plastic, the kind of generic emergency kit that a person maintains in a place of business because they're organized enough to plan for other people's problems. Si-jae pulled a folded sweatshirt off the shelf and set it on the couch. He pulled the sweatpants. He set a pair of thick socks on top of them, like they were the obvious conclusion of a sequence of steps. "Bathroom's through there," he said, gesturing to a door at the back. Aaliyah looked at the stack of dry clothes on the couch. "I'm not going to—" "You're shaking," he said. It wasn't unkind. It was simply factual, the way he said most things. She was shaking. She could feel it now that she was warm enough to register it properly. She picked up the clothes and went to the bathroom. When she came out, her work clothes were damp and cold in her hands, and she was wearing someone's oversized sweatshirt and sweatpants that were approximately 4 inches too long, and she felt simultaneously ridiculous and more comfortable than she'd been in recent memory. She'd wrung out her shirt over the sink and hung it and her coat on the towel bar with the focus of someone concentrating very hard on the practical task rather than on the situation they were in. Si-jae was in the small kitchen area attached to the lounge. He'd set a covered plate on the counter. "From earlier," he said. "Kitchen had leftover bibimbap. It's been kept warm." Aaliyah looked at the plate. "You don't have to do this," she said. He looked at her briefly. "I know." He turned and went back toward his office. She stood in the lounge for a moment, listening to his footsteps recede down the hallway, and then she sat down on the couch and pulled the plate toward her and ate every single thing on it. She hadn't eaten a real meal since breakfast. She realized, sitting there with an empty plate on the low table and the space heater quietly working beside her, that she'd gotten so used to rationing things. Food, warmth, comfort, the kind of basic security most people didn't notice they had, that she'd stopped registering when she was doing it. The couch was real. The warmth was real. She pulled her knees up to her chest and sat with that for a minute. She was asleep before she'd consciously decided to sleep. Si-jae didn't disturb her. In the morning, she woke to gray light through the small window near the ceiling and the sound of the city beginning its daily negotiation with itself. Her damp clothes were dry. They'd been moved from the bathroom and placed on the arm of the couch. At some point, she'd slept through, folded. She changed quickly. She left the borrowed clothes clean on the shelf where they'd come from. She washed the plate she'd used and put it away. She let herself out through the employee's entrance, which was unlocked, and walked to the corner and caught the first bus of the morning. She did not see Si-jae before she left. She told herself this was the entire extent of the incident. It was not. The change was not dramatic or immediate. It happened in the small, accumulative way things change when someone starts paying actual attention. Si-jae had always observed his restaurant with the specific attentiveness of someone who built things carefully and didn't want them damaged. But he began to observe Aaliyah Monroe differently after that Tuesday night, and not in the way a man observes a woman he's attracted to. Or not only that, not yet, but in the more unsettled way of someone who has noticed a pattern and can't stop noticing it. She flinched at sound, not every sound, not in a way the other staff would catch. But when glasses broke, and in a restaurant, glasses broke with some regularity, her body did something that wasn't quite a flinch, but wasn't nothing. A tightening. A half second of stillness before she recomposed. She checked the street before she left. Not the casual glance of someone deciding whether to open an umbrella. A scan. Specific and methodical, both directions, before she stepped through the door. When male customers stood too close, and some of them did, the specific kind of oblivious or deliberate closeness that happens in service environments, she rerouted around them with a smoothness that spoke of long practice rather than instinct. She refused rides. 3 separate times he was aware of, other staff offered to share cabs or car services during bad weather. She declined each time with a reason that was reasonable on its surface but didn't quite hold up to examination. Si-jae filed these observations alongside other things he knew about the world. The kind of things that, once seen, don't unstitch themselves from your understanding of how people move through their lives. He said nothing. Then Baek Do-yoon came to him. Do-yoon was 36 and had been Si-jae's lieutenant for 11 years, which meant he had been doing the organizational work of the Haneul Circle since he was 25 years old. He was careful in the specific way that careful people become when they've survived long enough in environments that don't forgive carelessness. He didn't bring things to Si-jae unless they warranted bringing. He came on a Thursday morning when the restaurant wasn't open yet. "There's a vehicle," Do-yoon said. He set a photograph on the desk between them. Black SUV. The image had been taken from a second-floor angle, probably from the building across the street. It's been parked on the block 4 times in the last 2 weeks. Different times of day, but always on the block. Always within sight of the entrance. Si-jae looked at the photograph. "Plates?" "Registered to a Terrence Maddox. 31 years old. He has a record." Do-yoon paused in the specific way he paused when the information was unpleasant but necessary. Domestic assault. Charges filed, then dropped twice. Third incident. The victim relocated before trial. Si-jae said nothing for a moment. One of ours, he said, though he already suspected the answer. No, he's connected to something else, but that comes second. First thing. Do-yoon looked at him carefully. He's watching the restaurant. The timing lines up with the end of the evening shift. Aaliyah's shift. Si-jae looked at the photograph for another moment. Who is he to her, he said. That's what I'm working on. The answer came back within 48 hours. It came with documentation that Si-jae read once in full and then set face down on the desk. Terrence Maddox had been Aaliyah Monroe's partner for 2 years. She had moved out of their shared apartment in October, a building in the Bronx, lease in his name, after the third incident that had resulted in a hospital visit she'd documented as a fall. She had relocated twice since then. Her current address in Queens was not in any public record he'd been able to find, which meant she'd been careful about it. She'd been careful, and he'd found her anyway. The second piece of information in Do-yoon's report landed differently. Terrence Maddox had recently come into the orbit of Gideon Rusk. Si-jae read that name and felt the specific temperature drop that useful information sometimes brought. Gideon Rusk was a competitor in the way that infections compete with living bodies, opportunistic, expansionist, and fundamentally uninterested in coexistence. He'd been operating on the margins of several territories for the past 18 months, looking for the place to apply pressure. The question was what he wanted with Terrence Maddox. The answer to that question would take longer to surface. In the meantime, Si-jae made a decision. He put protection on Aaliyah. 2 men on rotating shifts, nothing conspicuous, nobody in her building or in her immediate space. A car that happened to be parked near the bus stop she used in the mornings. A second pair of eyes on the block near Noir Han during evening hours. He gave no instructions beyond observation and the understanding that if the black SUV appeared, it was to be logged, and if Terrence Maddox moved toward her in any direct way, that was to be logged more urgently. He told nobody on the restaurant staff. He told Aaliyah nothing. He held that decision for 8 days. The 9th day was when she walked into his office and asked him directly about the man she'd noticed sitting in the coffee shop across the street for 4 mornings in a row. She didn't ask with uncertainty or nervous apology. She asked the way someone asks when they've already done the math and don't like the sum they've arrived at. He works for you, she said. She didn't sit down. She stood on the other side of his desk with her arms at her sides in the specific posture of a person keeping themselves very still. He's been there every morning. He was outside the laundromat on Saturday. Si-jae looked at her. He could have denied it. He could have given her a partial truth that technically held up. He had access to both options and the specific facility with language that came from years of situations more complex than this one. He didn't use either. Yes, he said. Her face went through something he watched and didn't interrupt. Because of Terrence, he said. Someone spotted the vehicle he's been using. I wanted to make sure you were safe before I'd understood the full situation. The silence was specific and textured. I didn't ask you to do that, she said. No. I didn't tell you anything about Terrence. I didn't tell you anything about my life outside this restaurant. Her voice was controlled in the way that voices get controlled when they're working very hard. And you just decided. You just decided that was the right thing to do, and you did it without telling me. Yes, Si-jae said. Do you understand what that is? She leaned forward slightly. Do you understand what it means when a man decides what's safe for you without asking you? When he makes choices about your life and presents them as protection? Si-jae was quiet. He used to say he was protecting me too, Aaliyah said. Every single time. I'm protecting you. This is for you. You don't understand the kind of people out there, she paused. Every single time. Si-jae looked at her for a moment. You're right, he said. She waited for the qualification. For the but, for the however, for the pivot toward reasonableness that would return the conversation to his framework. It didn't come. I made a decision that wasn't mine to make, he said. I won't make it again without your knowledge. She looked at him. That's it, she said. What would you like instead? The question landed in the room and sat there. I want to know, she said finally. Whatever you find out about him, I want to know. I'm not a person you manage. Understood, he said. And pull whoever you have on me. I mean it. I'll figure out my own situation. He held her eyes for a moment. Then tell me, he said, how you want me to help. The words weren't soft. He wasn't performing deference. He was asking an actual question and waiting for an actual answer. Aaliyah was quiet for a moment longer than felt comfortable. I don't know yet, she said. All right. She turned and left his office. The men came off rotation by the end of the day. Si-jae gave the instruction himself. Do-yoon received it with a carefully neutral expression and didn't comment. Aaliyah spent 3 days after that conversation noticing the absence of the man in the coffee shop across the street. She wasn't sure what she'd expected. She wasn't sure the absence made her feel better in the clean, uncomplicated way she'd wanted it to. What she knew was that he'd listened. Men who'd claimed to protect her had generally been very bad at listening to what she actually said. She filed this observation the way she filed other things she wasn't ready to process directly. Then, on a Sunday afternoon, she overheard a conversation she wasn't supposed to hear. She'd come back to the restaurant to retrieve her phone, which she'd left in her locker, or believed she'd left there, which was a panic in reverse situation that took her 40 minutes of retracing her shift to identify. She came in through the back. The kitchen was quiet. It was between service hours. She was moving through the hallway toward the locker room when she heard voices from the direction of the private dining room, which was separated from the hallway by a panel door that was currently not quite closed. She should have kept walking. She stopped because she heard her name. Not her name directly. She heard the word waitress, spoken in Korean. She'd picked up enough in 3 months to catch single words. And then Si-jae's voice. And then another voice she didn't recognize saying something in a register that was not a restaurant conversation, was not a management conversation, was not any kind of conversation that belonged in a legitimate place of business. She stood in the hallway for 11 seconds. She counted them afterward, unable to explain why that particular detail had lodged itself. Then she walked quickly to the locker room, retrieved her phone. It was there, exactly where she'd left it, and walked back out through the employee's entrance without looking toward the private dining room. She stood on the sidewalk in the January cold and thought about the specific quality of that voice, the way it moved, the particular vocabulary it carried even filtered through a language she didn't speak well. She'd grown up in Baltimore. She'd spent her 20s in neighborhoods where that register of conversation was not unfamiliar. She knew what it meant when men talked like that. She went home and sat with her phone in her hands and thought about the man who had given her dry clothes and warm food and an unlocked door, the man who had pulled his people back the moment she asked him to, the man who had said, "Tell me how you want me to help," without a single visible condition attached. She thought about what she hadn't understood about him. She thought about it all night. By morning, she'd arrived at a question she didn't yet have the information to answer. But the question had changed shape. It was no longer simply who is Kwon Si-jae. It was how much of what I think I know is actually true. And underneath that, smaller and harder and more honest, she was afraid of what the answer might be. Not because it would make her feel safe, because she was terrified that it wouldn't change what she already felt beginning to form, slowly, in the specific guarded place inside her that she'd thought she'd sealed off completely. Outside, the city moved. The buses ran their routes. Somewhere in Queens, a black SUV she didn't know about was sitting 2 blocks from her building with its engine off and its driver watching the street. And somewhere in Midtown Manhattan, in an office above a restaurant that was many things at once, Kwon Si-jae was reading a report that had arrived overnight. A report about Gideon Rusk, about Terrence Maddox, about the specific use Gideon intended to make of a woman who had no idea she'd been mapped into someone else's war. He read the report twice. Then he sat very still for a long time in the way that men sit when they are deciding something. And what he was deciding was not whether to act. He'd already decided that. What he was deciding was how to tell her the truth before she found it another way. Because she would find it. He had understood that about her from the first morning she walked out of his restaurant in borrowed clothes with the plate washed and put away, and not a single word of unnecessary debt attached to what he'd done. Aaliyah Monroe did not miss things. And she did not forgive the people who assumed she would. She went back to Noir Han on Monday. She hadn't decided to. That was the part she kept turning over during the bus ride, the 40-minute commute from Queens that she usually spent with her earbuds in and her eyes on the middle distance, not thinking about anything in particular. Except that morning she'd spent it thinking about this. Specifically, the decision to return. and she hadn't been able to locate the moment she'd actually made it. She'd simply woken up, gotten dressed in her work clothes, and walked to the bus stop, which told her something she wasn't ready to say out loud. The restaurant opened at 11. She arrived at 10:20 and let herself in through the employee's entrance, which accepted her keycard the same as it always had. And she went to her locker and put on her apron and started her opening side work the same way she started it every shift, because the alternative was standing somewhere and thinking, and she was done thinking for the moment. Ji Young, one of the other servers, was already there. She was 24 and relentlessly cheerful in a way that Aaliyah had initially found exhausting and had gradually come around to appreciating. "You look terrible," Ji Young said, without malice. "Thank you." "Did you sleep?" "Some." Ji Young looked at her the way young women look at older women when they suspect there's a story they're not being told. She had the good sense not to push. The first 2 hours of the shift were mechanical. Aaliyah took her tables, read her orders, moved through the dining room with the specific efficiency that comes from having done the same job long enough that your body does most of it without input from your conscious mind. She refilled water glasses. She recited specials. She smiled at a couple celebrating something, an anniversary, a birthday, she didn't ask, and meant it just enough. Si-jae was in the restaurant by noon. She knew because she heard him before she saw him. Not his voice, but the quality of attention in the room that shifted slightly when he moved through it. The kitchen staff didn't change volume exactly, but something adjusted. The front-of-house manager, Paul, straightened without being aware of it. It was the kind of ambient authority that Aaliyah had spent enough time around various kinds of powerful men to recognize. She didn't look toward his office. He didn't come out to the floor. By 2 in the afternoon, the lunch rush had thinned. She was refilling salt shakers at Station 3 when Paul appeared beside her. "Mr. Kwon would like a word," Paul said. She finished what she was doing with the salt shaker. "Set it down." "Okay," she said. She followed Paul to the short hallway that led to CJ's office, and Paul left her there and returned to the floor. She stood outside the door for a moment. The door was open about 3 inches. She pushed it the rest of the way. CJ was at his desk. He was looking at something on his laptop and he closed it when she came in, which was a small courtesy she noticed. "Sit down," he said. "I'm fine standing." He looked at her for a moment. He didn't push the point. "There are things you need to know," he said. "I've been deciding how to tell you. I've been deciding it wrong, which is to say I've been deciding when and whether, which aren't my decisions." Aaliyah crossed her arms. Not defensively. More like she was holding herself together at the seams while she waited to hear what came next. "What things?" she said. "Terrence Maddox is not watching this restaurant because of you," CJ said. "He's watching it because of me, because of who I am outside of this building." The room was very quiet. "And who are you outside of this building?" she said. He told her. Not all of it. Not in a way she could have later sworn was comprehensive. But enough. The Hanoel Circle. What it was, what it did, how long he'd been running it. He spoke without effect, without the kind of self-justifying packaging that people wrap around ugly truths to make them easier to hand over. He stated it the way you state facts, the same way he told her the couch was available, the bathroom was through there, the food had been kept warm. She listened without interrupting. When he was done, she stood very still for a moment and thought about the voice she'd heard through the panel door. She thought about the way the room shifted when he entered it. She thought about Do-yoon, whom she'd always registered as something other than a restaurant employee without being able to say exactly why. "How long?" she said. "Since I was 26. "And this restaurant?" "Is legitimate," he said. "The restaurant, the hotel property in Flushing, the logistics company in Jersey, those are real businesses. What I run alongside them is separate from what happens in these walls." "Separate," she repeated. "Yes. You brought it into these walls the moment you started watching me because of him." CJ was quiet. "Yes," he said. She uncrossed her arms. Her hands hung at her sides. She looked at the floor for a second, not in defeat, but in the specific way of someone working a problem that doesn't have a clean solution. "You knew who he was connected to before you told me about the surveillance." "Yes. So when you pulled the men off me, when I told you to stop, you pulled them, and you didn't tell me that he wasn't just my problem, that he was also yours, and that whatever Gideon Rusk wants to use him for puts me in the middle of something I didn't sign up for." CJ didn't look away. "That's correct," he said. That's not protecting me, she said. That's managing information. He took that without deflecting. She watched him take it, watched his jaw tighten and release. And what she was looking for was the tell, the moment when it became about his ego instead of the truth. It didn't come. I want to leave, she said. Okay. I'll finish my shift, but I need to think, and I need to not be in the same room as you while I do it. Understood. She turned and went back to the floor. She finished her shift. She thought and did not think, which is to say her mind ran the whole thing on a loop, while her hands did other things, clearing plates, running credit cards, folding cloth napkins into shapes she'd done enough times that they folded themselves. By the time she cashed out and got her coat, she had not reached a conclusion. What she had reached was a kind of exhausted clarity about what she was not going to do. She was not going to disappear again. She had done that in October. She'd packed what fit in 2 bags and left everything she couldn't carry and started over in a city that didn't care whether she made it or not, and she was done paying the relocation costs of someone else's violence. This was her job. This was her life she'd rebuilt, piece by piece, in this neighborhood, on these bus routes, at this particular restaurant. She was not running. She stepped outside and immediately understood that something was wrong. It was not a visual thing at first. It was the same feeling she'd had through the glass window weeks ago. The body registering information before the mind has caught up. She was halfway down the block when she placed it. The black SUV was parked across the street, engine off. No visible occupant from this distance, but she'd spent enough months learning to read parked cars the way other people read facial expressions. She kept walking. She did not change her pace. She did not look directly at the vehicle. At the corner, she went into the bodega on the right and stood between the drinks refrigerators for a moment, heart hitting the inside of her chest in a way that was not panic, but was adjacent to it, the productive cousin of panic, the kind that sharpens things rather than blurring them. She bought a bottle of water she didn't need and stood at the counter long enough to look out the window without looking like she was looking. The SUV hadn't moved. She was not going to call CG. She pulled her phone out and called her friend Dana instead. Dana was a paralegal in Crown Heights who worked late and always picked up, and who knew most of the relevant history without needing it re-explained. "Hey," Dana said. "Hey, can you just talk to me for a few minutes while I walk to the train?" A beat. Dana understood most things without being told them directly. "Yeah, absolutely. So listen, the most insane thing happened at work today." Dana talked. Aaliyah walked. She came out of the bodega and turned right instead of left, away from the train toward a busier block, more foot traffic, more light. The SUV didn't follow. She could hear it not following by the absence of engine noise behind her. She walked 3 extra blocks and caught the train from a different station. In the morning, she went back, because she was not running. What she didn't know was that while she'd been standing in the bodega buying water she didn't need, Baek Do-yoon had been sitting in a parked car of his own, 2 blocks north, watching the black SUV. And that he had photographed the man who'd stepped out of it at 11:50, walked to the corner, made a phone call, and gotten back in. Do-yoon brought the photograph to CJ's office at 7 the next morning. "He's escalating," Do-yoon said. He placed the photograph on the desk without editorial. "This is the 5th appearance in 8 days. He's not just watching the building anymore. He got out and walked the block." CJ looked at the photograph. "He called someone," Do-yoon said. "We couldn't intercept the call, but we got the duration and the number. It routes to a prepaid, but the cell tower puts the receiving phone in Red Hook." "Rusk," CG said. "Most likely." CJ set the photograph down. He looked at it for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. "What does Rusk want?" he said. It wasn't a question exactly. He'd been assembling the answer for days. He wanted to hear Do-yoon say it. "He wants a way inside your operation," Do-yoon said. "And he's found a person with direct access to your building and your schedule." He paused. "She's not going to stop coming in. You know that." "Yes." "And pulling her out of the building would require her consent, which you've established you don't have." "Yes." "So we have a situation." CJ stood up and walked to the window that overlooked the back alley. It was not a view with anything particular to recommend it. He looked at it anyway. "What do we know about how Terrence is communicating with Rusk?" he said. "Directly, through the prepaid. Possibly in person. Rusk has a warehouse operation in Red Hook he uses as a front. Equipment storage, some kind of event rental business that doesn't actually rent anything. Do-yoon's tone was dry. We think Maddox goes there. Can we place him there? We can try. Do that. Do-yoon picked up the photograph. There's one more thing, he said. He said it in the register that meant he didn't want to say it. Rusk knows she means something to you. Si-jae turned from the window. What makes you say that? Because Maddox has been watching the restaurant for 2 weeks, and Rusk has done nothing with the information yet. He's building something. He's waiting for the moment it costs you the most. Do-yoon met his eyes. That's not how Rusk operates when the target is just a building or a route. That's how he operates when the target is a person. The silence in the office was different from other silences. Si-jae said nothing. She's leverage, Do-yoon said, because it needed to be said plainly. She's leverage and she doesn't know it, and Maddox is the one who put her in that position, probably without fully understanding what he was being used for. Si-jae walked back to his desk. Then I need to tell her, he said. She just found out you run a criminal organization. Yes. The timing is... I know the timing, Si-jae said. His voice was even, but Do-yoon heard what was under it. Get me everything on Rusk's Red Hook operation. Physical layout, how many people he keeps there regularly, access points. And keep 2 men on the block near Noir Han, but not visible from the street. I don't want her to see them. What do I tell them if Maddox approaches her? Log it. Don't intervene unless she's in direct physical danger. If she's in direct physical danger, intervene first and call me second. Do-yoon nodded. One more thing, Si-jae said. Yes. If she asks? If she asks whether I have anyone watching the block, tell her yes. Do-yoon looked at him. She's going to be angry, he said. She's going to find out anyway, Si-jae said. I'd rather she find out I told the truth. Aaliyah found out 2 days later. Not from Do-yoon. She found out the way she'd found out about the coffee shop situation, by noticing. There was a car on the block that she'd seen before. Different position, same car. She'd developed the habit of cataloging vehicles in a block radius of any place she spent regular time, which was the kind of habit that got built into you through experience rather than decision. She walked into Si-jae's office without knocking. He looked up from the laptop. He didn't look surprised. There's a car on the block, she said. Yes. She stopped in the middle of the room. You said you'd pulled them, she said. I told you I'd pulled the men who had been on you specifically. I put 2 men on the block watching for Maddox's vehicle. I told them that if you asked, they were to tell you the truth. He looked at her steadily. I should have told you directly. I made a call that avoided a confrontation I didn't feel I'd earned yet. You made a call, she said. Yes. You keep making calls. Yes, he said. And I keep being wrong about how I'm making them. She stood there for a moment. Tell me everything, she said. Not the version you've decided I need, everything. He told her about Gideon Rusk. He told her about the Red Hook operation. He told her what Do-yoon had said about leverage, and he said it using that exact word, and he watched her face process it. She sat down. She didn't ask to. She simply sat down on the chair across from his desk and put her hands on her knees and looked at the floor. He found me to use against you, she said. That's what we believe. He doesn't care about me. I don't think he cares about anything except the territory he wants. But Terrence, she said the name the way you say something that's lost its power to frighten you and gained something worse in its place, a kind of bleak familiarity. Terrence just handed me over. Terrence is being used. That doesn't make him less dangerous. No, she said, it makes him more dangerous. Because he thinks he's in control and he's not, and men like that do stupid things when they realize it. Si-jae looked at her. That's accurate, he said. She was quiet for a moment. When she looked up at him, her expression had settled into something he recognized as a particular kind of resolution. Not the resolution that comes from having made peace with something, but the harder kind, the kind that comes from deciding you're going to move through it rather than around it. What does he want me to do? She said. Terrence, what does he want from me? We believe he'll approach you directly, ask you to give him information about the building, the schedule, make it personal, remind you of things, put you in a position of fear or obligation. And if I don't, Si-jae's jaw moved. We don't know yet what escalation looks like from Rusk's end, he said. But based on how he's operated in other situations, he stopped. Say it, she said. He'll try to make refusal feel more dangerous than compliance. Aaliyah breathed. She breathed carefully, the way you breathe when your body is running hot, and you need to bring it down. So I'm in the middle of this whether I do anything or not, she said. Yes. And the people around me in this restaurant are potentially in it too. CJ looked at her, and she could see the answer in how he didn't immediately say no. That's a yes, she said. The risk is primarily concentrated on, that's a yes, she said again, not loudly, but with a kind of finality that closed the door on softened language. Yes, he said. She stood up. She walked to the window. Not the window that looked onto the alley, the other one, the small one near the door that had a partial view of the street. She looked out at the city, which was doing what cities do, which is to say, it was proceeding entirely without regard for her situation. I need 2 days, she said. For what? To think. She turned around. And I need you to not make any decisions about what happens next without telling me first. I'm not a variable in your plan. I'm not something you account for. If what happens next involves me in any way, I am at the table for that conversation. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yes, CJ said. Do you actually understand it, or are you saying yes because it's what I need to hear right now? He looked at her for a moment. I understand it, he said, and I'll be honest with you. There's a version of me that wants to move you somewhere safe and handle this without you. That version of me is wrong, but I want you to know he exists because I'd rather you know I'm fighting an instinct than pretend I don't have one. She looked at him for a longer moment than she'd intended. It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to her, and she didn't know what to do with it, so she filed it somewhere she couldn't immediately access and walked toward the door. 2 days, she said. She was still processing all of it, the information, the anger, the specific exhausting calculus of figuring out what to do when every available option had something wrong with it. When she got home that evening and found the voicemail, she almost didn't listen to it. Unknown number. She let it sit on her phone for 20 minutes while she ate leftovers standing at her kitchen counter because that was the kind of day it was. And then she played it. Terrence's voice came out of the speaker like something that had been waiting behind a door she'd thought she'd locked. Hey, don't hang up. I know you're scared, but you don't need to be. I just want to talk. I know where you're working now. I know who you're working for. And I think you probably deserve to know what kind of man that is. Call me back. I'm not trying to scare you. I just think it's time we had a real conversation. She listened to it twice. The second time she listened to it, she noticed something. The phrasing. I know who you're working for. Not I know you work at a restaurant. Not I looked you up. The specific construction of it. The implication that the knowledge was significant, that it was leverage, that she should be afraid of what he knew rather than what she knew. He was working with what Rusk had given him, and he didn't fully understand what he was holding. She set the phone down on the counter. She was not going to call him back. She was not going to disappear. She was not going to hand CJ information and let herself be moved off the board like a piece someone else was playing. She picked the phone back up. She called CJ. He answered on the second ring. He left me a voicemail, she said. Tonight, from an unknown number. A pause. What did he say? He said he wants to talk. He said he knows who I work for, and I should know what kind of man you are. She leaned against the counter. He's trying to play both ends. He wants me scared of you and scared of him at the same time, so I cooperate with whatever Rusk has him pointed at. Yes, CG said. He's coming at me directly now. Yes. Then my 2 days are up, she said. I told you I needed time to think. I've thought. She stopped, swallowed something that wanted to be fear and declined to let it. I'm not going to keep reacting to things. I'm done being the thing that happens to other people's plans. CJ was very quiet on the line. Aaliyah, don't, she said. Don't tell me it's too dangerous. Don't tell me to let you handle it. I've heard both of those sentences from someone else, and I know what they really mean. A long pause. What are you thinking? He said. I'm thinking that Terrence wants me to call him back. And I'm thinking that Gideon Rusk built a plan around the assumption that I'm still the woman I was when I left the Bronx in October. Her voice had gone to a place that was quiet and controlled and not particularly warm. He's wrong. And I want to show him how wrong he is in a way that ends this. The line hummed for a moment. If you're suggesting what I think you're suggesting, CJ said, then I need you to understand what that means. what it actually means, not the version that sounds clean when you say it out loud. I know what it means, she said. You've never done anything like, I know what it means, she said again. I spent 2 years managing a man whose moods were a minefield I had to read every single day. I know how to make someone think they're in control. A beat. I just never used it for myself before. The silence on the line changed quality. When Si-jae spoke again, his voice had changed too. Not softer, but more level, like something that had been braced had eased slightly. Then we do this together, he said, or we don't do it. Together, she said, means I make the decisions that are mine to make. Yes. And you follow my lead where I'm the one with the position. Yes. She exhaled. Okay, she said. She hung up and stood in her kitchen with the phone in her hand and looked at the voicemail notification still sitting on her screen. The unknown number, the waiting message, Terrence's voice saying, I just think it's time we had a real conversation. She was going to give him one, just not the one he was expecting. She pressed call back on the unknown number and stood straight against the counter, and when it rang twice and he picked up and said, hey, in that careful, calibrated tone she'd heard 1,000 times, the one that meant he was deciding how much rope to give her, she said, You wanted to talk. I'm listening. And the last door she'd been leaving open behind her swung closed. Terrence took 3 seconds to answer. 3 seconds was enough time for Aaliyah to hear him recalibrate. She knew the sound of it, the small adjustment in breathing that meant he'd been caught off guard by her directness, and was now deciding how to play it. She'd spent 2 years learning to read those 3 seconds the way other people read weather. I'm glad you called back, he said. The careful warmth in his voice was something she recognized like a smell from a house she used to live in, familiar and wrong simultaneously. I wasn't sure you would. You said you wanted to talk, she said, so talk. Not like this. Not on the phone. A pause, timed. I want to see you, somewhere neutral, somewhere you feel safe. She almost laughed at the word. Why, she said. Because what I have to tell you about your boss isn't something you're going to want to hear standing in a parking lot. It's going to change things for you, Aaliyah. And I think you deserve to hear it from someone who actually cares about what happens to you. She noted every word. Your boss. Someone who cares. The specific architecture of it. Establishing himself as the protector. Reframing Si-jae as the threat. Positioning himself as the person offering her something rather than taking something from her. All right, she said. Where? He named a diner in Astoria. Thursday evening, 7 o'clock. She said fine. She hung up and stood in her kitchen for a moment, and then she called Si-jae back. Astoria, she said. Thursday, 7. I know the area, Si-jae said. He's going to try to tell me things about you. Use them to make me feel like I have no good options. Most of what he tells you will be true, Si-jae said. That landed in the room, and she let it land. I need you to understand that going in. He's going to have real information, probably from Rusk's people, who have been watching us for longer than we realized. He'll use the truth to build a frame that serves his purpose. I know how that works, she said. That's what made it effective the first time. A short silence. What do you need from me before Thursday? He said. Everything you know about what Rusk knows. If Terrence is going to come at me with facts, I need to know which ones he has. I'll have Do-yoon put it together. And I need it directly, not filtered. Yes. And I need you to not have anyone in that diner. Silence. Aaliyah, outside is fine, a block, 2 blocks. But not inside. He'll be looking for backup. If he sees anything that reads wrong, he shuts down and we lose the opening. A longer silence. All right, Si-jae said. You're agreeing faster than I expected. You're right, he said simply. That's why. She went to bed that night and didn't sleep much, which was fine because she wasn't expecting to. She lay in the dark and ran the Thursday conversation in her mind the way she used to run difficult tables before a big shift, anticipating the objections, the pivots, the moments when she'd need to redirect without letting the other person know she was redirecting. She was good at this. She'd been good at it her whole life. She just hadn't known it was a skill before. She'd called it survival. Do-yoon met her at Noir Han on Wednesday morning before the restaurant opened. He didn't seem comfortable with the meeting. He sat across from her at a four-top near the window with a folder between them and the specific posture of a man who had been given instructions he was following precisely because Si-jae had told him to, not because he thought it was the right call. He knows about the Flushing property, Do-yoon said. He opened the folder. He turned it toward her. The hotel. He knows it's held under a shell company, and he has documentation of the original acquisition, how it was funded, which means he has something that could be used to establish the organization's financial structure if it got to the right people. Aaliyah looked at the papers. Leverage, she said, for Rusk. He's been building a case, not a legal case, but a pressure case. Enough information to threaten Si-jae's operation without actually going to law enforcement, because Rusk has as much to lose from law enforcement as anyone. So he wants to use it to force territory concessions. We believe so. And Maddox, Do-yoon stopped. He looked at her in the careful way of someone assessing how much to say. Maddox is going to use it differently. He's going to present it to you as evidence that you're in danger, that you're being used, that the only person who can help you navigate out is him. By giving Rusk what he wants. By giving Rusk what he wants, Do-yoon confirmed. She looked at the folder for a moment. What else? She said. Do-yoon turned another page. He knows about the night you stayed here, after the snowstorm. He said it neutrally. We believe Maddox has a source, someone who saw you leave the next morning in borrowed clothes. He's going to try to use it to suggest that you and Si-jae have a personal arrangement, that you're already compromised, that cooperation is your best option because you're already implicated. She looked up from the folder. Who's the source? She said. Do-yoon was quiet. We don't know yet, he said. She looked at him. You have a guess, she said. He didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it either, and she filed that. Is there anything else he's likely to have? She said. That's what we've been able to establish. He closed the folder. He looked at her directly. Miss Monroe, I want to be clear about something. Go ahead. I've worked for Si-jae for 11 years. I've seen him make decisions about a lot of people in a lot of situations. I've seen him be right and wrong about both. He looked at his hands for a moment, then back up. He's not wrong about you, but I need to know that you understand what Thursday actually is. If this goes badly, if Maddox brings people, if Rusk has planned for a counter, there's a limit to how quickly we can respond from outside. I know that. Do you? I've been in rooms with dangerous men before, she said, longer than you've known about me. He looked at her for a moment. Something shifted in his expression. Not respect exactly, but a recalibration. All right, he said. He left the folder. Thursday came the way anticipated things come, too slowly and then all at once. She dressed carefully. Nothing that looked dressed up, nothing that looked like armor. She wore the gray sweater she wore when she needed to feel like herself, rather than like a version of herself performing a function. She pulled her hair back. She put on the small gold earrings she'd bought herself 2 months ago when she'd had a marginally good week, because they were hers and no one had given them to her, and she liked being reminded of that. She took the train to Astoria. She walked the 4 blocks from the station to the diner. She noted the car parked on the north end of the block. Black sedan, engine on, which was Do-yoon's people maintaining the perimeter, and then she stopped noticing it and pushed open the door. Terrence was already there. He was in a booth at the back, which told her he'd come early to choose his position. He'd always done that. Arrived first, arranged the environment, made sure he had his back to the wall and a clear view of everything that entered. She'd learned to stop reading it as consideration and start reading it as control. He looked good. That was the disorienting thing, the part she hadn't fully prepared for. The way people who hurt you can look exactly the same as they always looked, can look fine and normal and not marked by anything they've done. He had on a clean jacket. He'd gotten a haircut recently. He stood up when she came in, which he'd never done when they were together. Hey, he said. Hey, she said. She slid into the booth across from him rather than beside him. He'd probably expected beside him. She watched him adjust. They ordered coffee because you order something. The waitress came and went. The diner had the low hum of a Thursday evening, a few tables occupied, no one paying attention to them. Terrence put his hands around his coffee mug. I'm glad you came, he said. You said you had things I needed to hear. I do. He leaned forward slightly. I know this is weird. I know we didn't end things in a good place. She looked at him. That's one way to say it, she said. He had the grace to look briefly uncomfortable. I'm not here to relitigate that, he said. I'm here because I found out some things about your boss that I think you have a right to know. Because I do care about what happens to you, whatever else went wrong between us. She wrapped her hands around her own mug. She waited. He told her about Si-jae. He was thorough about it. The Hanul circle, the operations, the financial structures, the specific piece about the Flushing Hotel. He had documentation he'd printed out, which he slid across the table. She looked at it without touching it. She already knew most of it. She noted the parts she didn't, which were thin and largely inferential. He watched her face while he talked. She gave him appropriate responses, small reactions, not performed, just enough to let him feel like the information was landing. You understand what this means, he said when he'd finished. For you. You've been working in that restaurant talking to him, and you don't know what you're involved in. What am I involved in, she said. If anyone investigates that operation, federal, local, anyone, everyone connected to it is a target. You, the kitchen staff, anyone who works there. She let that sit for a moment. What do you want me to do? She said. He'd been waiting for that question. She could see him settle into it. There's a man I've been talking to, he said. A businessman. He has concerns about Kwon's operation, competitive concerns. And he's willing to help anyone who cooperates with him get clear of any legal exposure before things go sideways. He paused. He doesn't want you. He wants information about the building, schedules, when CJ meets with people. That's it. And in exchange you get out clean. I make sure of it. He looked at her with something that was probably supposed to read as sincerity. I'm not asking you to do anything dangerous. I'm asking you to protect yourself. She looked at him for a long moment. Who's the man? She said. His name doesn't matter right now. Gideon Rusk, she said. The name landed on the table between them and something changed in Terrence's face. A small, rapid thing, quickly controlled, but she'd been watching for it. I don't know what you think you know. Terrence. Her voice was flat and clear. I know exactly what's happening here. I know who you're working with, and I know what he wants. And I know that you think I'm still the woman who stood in a hospital and told a nurse she'd fallen downstairs. She looked at him directly. I'm not. His jaw tightened. Aaliyah, I'm going to give you one chance to be honest with me. What does Rusk actually want? Not the version you've been told to say. The actual thing. Something moved across his face. Anger, she thought. And underneath the anger, something that might have been shame, but didn't have enough room to breathe. He wants CJ's operation, he said. He wants the territory, the routes, the contacts. The hotel is part of it. The restaurant is part of it. He leaned forward slightly, and now the careful warmth was gone, and what was underneath was what she'd always known was underneath. And he knows CJ cares about you, which means you're worth more to him as a problem than as a helper. You understand what I'm telling you? You're telling me Rusk will use me regardless of whether I cooperate. I'm telling you that cooperating is the only version of this where you have any say in what happens to you. She looked at him. She thought about the version of herself that had stood in an emergency room at 2 a.m. and agreed for the last time that it had been an accident. I'm not doing this, she said. His expression shifted in a way that was very familiar. You don't understand the situation you're in. I understand it better than you do, she said, because I know things you don't know, and because Rusk told you what he needed you to believe to get me in this booth. And I'm telling you right now that what he told you isn't the full picture. What does that mean? It means you're being used too, she said. You think you're the one operating here, but you're not. You're the delivery mechanism. Once you've delivered, once you've either gotten me to cooperate or established that I won't, Rusk doesn't need you anymore. And men like Rusk don't carry people they don't need. Something flickered in his eyes. You don't know what you're talking about, he said, but the confidence had thinned. Okay, she said. She moved to pick up her coat. His hand came across the table and closed around her wrist. Not hard, but the grip was there. She went very still. Sit down, he said. His voice had gone quiet in a way she remembered. The quiet was always more frightening than the volume. She looked at his hand on her wrist. She looked at his face. Let go of me, she said, each word separate and clear. I need you to hear me out. Let go of my wrist, she said, or I'm going to make a scene in this diner that ends with law enforcement involved, and Rusk is going to hear that you blew this the moment things didn't go your way. Let go. A long moment. He let go. She pulled her wrist back. She did not rub it. She put her coat on slowly, deliberately, giving herself the time she needed to make her hands steady. I'm going to walk out of here, she said, and you're going to let me, because you've already done the one thing that tells me everything. You grabbed me when I didn't go along, which is the only play you've ever had. She stood up. This isn't over, he said. I know, she said. She walked out. She made it half a block before her legs registered what her adrenaline had been suppressing, and she stopped and put her hand on a brick wall for a moment and breathed. The car was still on the north end of the block. She straightened up and kept walking and took the long route to the train station, and by the time she got home she'd reconstructed her composure into something that would hold until she was alone. She called Si-jae from her apartment. She told him everything. She told him about the documentation, the specific ask, what Terrence had said about being used as leverage regardless of cooperation, and what she'd told Terrence in return. He grabbed your wrist, Si-jae said. His voice had gone to a place she hadn't heard before. I handled it, she said. Aaliyah, I handled it. That's not the important part. She pulled her knees up on the couch. The important part is what he said about Rusk. He confirmed it without meaning to. I'm more valuable as a pressure point than as a source, which means Rusk was never planning to leave me alone regardless of what I did. The cooperation play was just a test to see what I'd do. Silence on the line. Yes, Si-jae said. You knew that. I suspected it. And you didn't say it. I thought if I said it before Thursday you might not go, and I needed to know what he'd tell you directly. A pause. I'm sorry. That was wrong. She sat with that for a moment. It was, she said. The next 48 hours moved with the specific quality of time when you're waiting for something you can't fully see. She went to work. She did her job. She did not tell Ji-young or Paul or anyone on the floor what was happening, because the weight of involving them in something they hadn't chosen was heavier than carrying it herself. On Saturday evening, Do-yoon came to Si-jae's office. Aaliyah was there. Si-jae had asked her to be there, and she'd come, not because she'd entirely forgiven the withholding, but because the practical reality was that being informed was more important right now than maintaining the distance she was entitled to. Do-yoon came in and closed the door. He looked at Si-jae first, then at Aaliyah. The order of it told her something. We have a problem, he said. He put a photograph on the desk. It was a surveillance image, grainy, taken from some distance, but clear enough. Two men standing outside a building in what looked like Red Hook. One of them was Terrence. The other one she didn't recognize. That's Rusk's warehouse, Do-yoon said. The image is from last night. We had a man watching the building. He paused. The man in the image with Maddox is Park Sung-jin. Silence. Si-jae looked at the photograph for a long time without speaking. Aaliyah looked at Si-jae. His face had gone very still in a way she hadn't seen before. Not the controlled stillness of a man maintaining composure in a difficult conversation, but the specific stillness of a person who has received information that has changed the shape of everything they were looking at. Who is Park Sung-jin? She said. Do-yoon glanced at Si-jae. Si-jae said, He's been with the Haneul Circle for 9 years. He manages logistics coordination for 3 of our distribution routes. A beat. He has access to our scheduling system. He knows when I'm in the building. He knows the layout of the private areas. Aaliyah looked at the photograph. He's the source, she said. The one you didn't know about. The one who saw me leave the morning after the snowstorm. Do-yoon said, We believe so. We also believe he's the reason Rusk's intelligence on our operation is as current as it is. The documentation Maddox showed you at the diner, the Flushing acquisition details, that came from internal records Sung-jin had access to. The room was very quiet. How long? Si-jae said. We don't know. Minimum 6 months based on what Rusk demonstrably knows. Could be longer. Aaliyah watched Si-jae's face process this. She watched something move through it that she didn't have a name for. Not anger, not exactly. Something older and heavier than anger. He was at my father's funeral, Si-jae said quietly. Nobody spoke. He carried the arrangements, Si-jae said. When my father died, Sung-jin handled everything because I asked him to. He looked at the photograph. Because I trusted him. The statement sat in the room with all its on the desk. Aaliyah leaned forward to see it. It was a printout of what looked like communication intercepts. Fragmented, technical, but clear enough in the relevant parts. We got this from monitoring the prepaid Rusk's operation uses for external contacts, Do-yoon said. It came through this morning. It took us most of the day to decode the routing. He pointed to a section near the bottom of the page. This is from Rusk to Maddox. It went out 6 hours ago. Aaliyah read it. The direct approach failed. Move to contingency. The woman doesn't cooperate. Use what we have on the restaurant staff. Make it specific. We need the meeting location for next Thursday's external contact. She read it twice. What meeting? She said. Si-jae looked at Do-yoon. I have a meeting scheduled next Thursday with representatives from a supply network we use, Si-jae said. It's been on the internal schedule for 3 weeks, which means Sung-jin knows about it. He looked at Aaliyah, which means Rusk knows about it. What happens if Rusk knows the location? She said. Neither of them answered immediately, and she understood the answer from the silence. He doesn't want the territory, she said slowly, or not only the territory. He wants you specifically. If he takes out the leadership, Do-yoon started. The organization fractures, Aaliyah finished, and Rusk walks into the vacuum. She looked at Si-jae. This was never about using me to get information. I was a test to see how I'd respond and whether the response would tell him anything about you, about how you'd react if I was in danger. Si-jae's jaw worked. Yes, he said. He's been baiting you through me this whole time. Yes. She stood up. She walked to the window. Outside, the street was doing its ordinary business. Cabs, pedestrians, the particular noise of a Saturday city that doesn't know anything is wrong. Cancel the Thursday meeting, she said. If I cancel it, Rusk knows Sung-jin's been made, Si-jae said. He'll pull back and rebuild from a new position. We lose the window. Then don't cancel it. Move it. She turned around. Move it somewhere Sung-jin doesn't have on his calendar yet. Give him the new information today, through channels he'd normally receive it, and watch whether Rusk's people react to the change. Do-yoon looked at Si-jae. That's how we confirm he's still passing information, Do-yoon said, and how we know exactly what he's telling them. We'd need to move fast, Si-jae said. I know, Aaliyah said, and we need to deal with Sung-jin. Yes, Si-jae said. The word carried its own weight. Legally, she said. She looked at him directly. I mean legally. I mean in a way that ends his ability to operate, and I mean with law enforcement if that's what it takes. She held his eyes. I know that's not how you'd normally handle it. I'm telling you that's how this gets handled, because I'm not going to be part of something that goes the other way. Si-jae looked at her for a long moment. There are complications to bringing law enforcement into. I know there are complications, she said. I'm not naive about what those complications mean for you. But you told me I was at the table for decisions that involved me, and this involves me, and that's what I'm saying. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. We do this in a way that I can live with, or we don't do it together. The room held its breath. Do-yoon looked at the floor. Si-jae looked at her for another moment, and then something in his posture shifted. Not surrender, not performance, but the specific change in a person when they've made a real decision rather than a managed one. All right, he said. All right as in you're agreeing to the principle. All right as in we find a way to do this that stands up, he said, whatever that requires. Aaliyah breathed. She turned back to the window and looked at the street. Then we have a problem, she said, because Rusk moves Thursday regardless of whether we fully confirmed Sung-jin. He has a timeline. He's not going to wait because we need more time to be certain. No, Do-yoon said, he's not. And if he moves Thursday, she said, and we're not ready, then the meeting location becomes an ambush site, Do-yoon said. And anyone in that room, don't, Si-jae said. One word, quiet and absolute, a silence. Then Aaliyah said, we need Rusk to move on our timetable. Not his. She turned back to the room. We need to give him a reason to wait. Something that makes him hold off the Thursday play because he thinks a better opportunity is coming. What kind of reason? Do-yoon said. She looked at him. She looked at Si-jae. Me, she said. I'm the reason. I tell Terrence I changed my mind. Si-jae went very still. No, he said. I tell him I've been thinking about what he said and I'm scared and I want to cooperate. She kept her voice level. I make Rusk think he's getting a source inside the operation. Someone who'll give him what he needs without the ambush risk. someone valuable enough to wait for. You're talking about walking directly into his operation, Si-jae said. I'm talking about making him come to me, she said. There's a difference. The difference is a margin, he said, that I don't trust. You don't get to make that decision, she said. Aaliyah, you don't get to make it. Her voice didn't shake. This is exactly what we talked about. This is the decision that's mine to make. I'm the one with the position. I'm the one Rusk thinks is vulnerable. And I'm telling you that the only move we have that buys us time and keeps Thursday from becoming a massacre is me. He looked at her, and she looked back at him, and neither of them moved. If something goes wrong, he said. Then something goes wrong, she said. But it goes wrong with me choosing it, not with me standing in a kitchen in Queens waiting to find out what two men decided to do with my life. The silence lasted a long time. Do-yoon was looking at the floor again. Si-jae looked at Aaliyah Monroe standing in the middle of his office with her chin up and her hands at her sides, and the particular quality in her eyes of someone who has already made the decision and is now waiting for the room to catch up. He thought about an employee's entrance in January, about dry clothes and warm food and a door unlocked. If we do this, he said, we do it with preparation, every contingency we can build. Yes, she said, and you tell me everything, every communication, every word Terrence says to you. Yes. And at the first sign that it's going the wrong way, I'll signal, she said. We agree on a signal, and I use it, and your people come in. Do-yoon looked up. We'd need to wire her, he said. If she's going into a meeting with Rusk's people, we need audio. Fine, Aaliyah said. And we need a location we control, Do-yoon said. Or can control. We can't let Rusk choose the meeting point. She nodded. Si-jae looked at the photograph still on his desk. Park Sung-jin standing outside a Red Hook warehouse with Terrence Maddox. 9 years. His father's funeral. He turned it face down. Then we start tonight, he said. Aaliyah picked up her phone to call Terrence. Her hands were steady. She noted that they were steady, and she noted why. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because the fear had found its proper size and its proper place, and it was no longer the largest thing in the room. She dialed. Terrence answered on the first ring, which told her he'd been waiting, which told her Rusk had already instructed him to stay ready. I've been thinking, she said. About what you said. A pause. She could hear him recalibrate. I'm listening, he said. I think I need to meet the man you work for, she said, directly. Because if I'm going to do this, I need to know exactly what I'm agreeing to and who I'm agreeing to it with. Another pause. Longer. That can be arranged, Terrence said carefully. Soon, she said, not Thursday. I need a few days to get what he wants. She let a breath into her voice. Controlled. Just enough. I'm scared, Terrence. I just need this to be over. The words came out of her mouth and landed in the right register, and she hated how easy they were to say, because she'd said them before and meant them, and using them now as a tool felt like something she didn't have a clean name for. I'll make some calls, Terrence said. I'll get back to you. Okay, she said. She hung up. She looked at Si-jae across the room. He's calling Rusk right now, she said. Yes, Si-jae said, which means Rusk is going to want to verify the change before he agrees to a delay. Yes. Which means the next 48 hours are the most dangerous part of this, before we have a plan and after we've put the pieces in motion. Yes, Si-jae said. Do-yoon looked up from the desk where he'd been making notes. There's one more thing we haven't addressed, he said. They both looked at him. Sung-jin, he said. If we're running a controlled approach through Maddox over the next 48 hours, Sung-jin is still inside the organization, still has access. If he gets nervous, if he picks up on anything, any change in how he's being treated or what information is flowing to him, he could warn Rusk before we're ready. The room went quiet. Si-jae looked at the face-down photograph. I'll handle Sung-jin, he said. How? Aaliyah said. He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd walked into his office that evening, she saw something in his face that wasn't control, something that moved underneath the control like water under ice, something that had been there the whole time and was now pressing up against the surface where she could see it. In a way you can live with, he said. She held his eyes. She wanted to push. She wanted to demand the specifics, to stand in the room until she had every piece of the plan in language she could verify. But there was something in the way he said it, Not a performance of reassurance, not the carefully constructed comfort of someone managing her expectations, but the stripped, tired voice of a man making a commitment he understood the cost of, that made her hold the question rather than ask it. "Okay," she said. It was the first time she'd trusted him without requiring the proof first. She wasn't sure yet whether that was wisdom or the most dangerous thing she'd done in a very long time. The 48 hours after that phone call were the longest Aaliyah had spent since October. She went to work both days. She took her tables and ran her sections and smiled at the right moments because the alternative was standing still long enough for the full weight of what she'd set in motion to land on her at once, and she didn't have room for that yet. Ji-young noticed something was off and had the good sense not to name it directly. Paul noticed nothing, which was its own kind of comfort. Si-jae handled Sung-jin on Sunday morning. He didn't tell her exactly how until after. What she knew was that Sung-jin came into the restaurant at 9, which was earlier than his usual arrival, and that he was in Si-jae's office for 40 minutes, and that when he came out his face had the specific quality of a man who has been shown something he cannot recover from knowing. Do-yoon walked him out, not roughly, not with any visible indication of what had happened, but walked him out in the specific way that communicates finality without requiring a scene. Sung-jin did not return to the building. Si-jae told her later that he'd confronted him directly, laid the evidence on the desk, the photographs, the communication intercepts, the documentation that could only have come from internal records, and given him two options. The first option ended with Sung-jin in federal custody, because Si-jae had enough on him to make that call and the willingness, for the first time in his professional life, to make it. The second option required Sung-jin to make one final transmission to Rusk's contact, confirming the Thursday meeting at a location Si-jae's people had already prepared, and then disappear from New York permanently. Sung-jin chose the second option. "Did you believe him?" Aaliyah said. "That he'd actually go?" "No," Si-jae said. "Do-yoon is handling the rest of it." She didn't ask what that meant. She'd decided, in the specific calculus she was running now about what she could and couldn't carry, that some things had to stay on his side of the line for her to maintain the line at all. Terrence called back Monday afternoon. She was on the floor when her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She excused herself, went to the service hallway, answered on the third ring. "Wednesday," Terrence said. "He wants to meet Wednesday evening, 9 o'clock. "Where?" she said. He gave her an address in Brooklyn. She recognized the neighborhood, Red Hook, which meant Rusk's warehouse, which meant Rusk's territory, Rusk's environment, every advantage on his side. "That doesn't work for me," she said. A pause. "He's not going to—" "I'm not meeting him in a place he owns," she said. "Tell him I'll come to Brooklyn, but I'm not walking into a warehouse. There's an abandoned waterfront restaurant on the south end of Van Brunt, Fiorentino's. It's been closed 2 years, public enough that I don't feel trapped, private enough that no one's going to walk past." She'd chosen it with Do-yoon on Sunday night. They'd spent 4 hours on it. "That's where I'll meet him, or I don't meet him." Silence on the line. She could hear Terrence calculating whether to push back, whether this was the kind of condition a nervous woman would plausibly set. "I'll tell him," Terrence said. "Tell him Wednesday, 9 o'clock, and tell him I'm bringing what I have on CJ's Thursday schedule." She put just enough into her voice, the tightness, the edge of someone who has made a decision they're not entirely at peace with. "I just need this to be done." She hung up. She texted Do-yoon one word, "Fiorentino's." His response came back in under a minute. Good. They had 36 hours. Do-yoon's people went through Fiorentino's on Monday night. The building had been a restaurant for 30 years before a kitchen fire gutted the back half and the owners walked away from the insurance dispute. The front half was intact, tables still bolted to the floor, a bar along one wall, a kitchen pass-through that now opened onto charred framework and open air. The ceiling had held. The windows along the waterfront side were boarded, but the boards were old enough to let slivers of ambient light through. Do-yoon put 4 people in the building before dawn on Tuesday. 2 in the ceiling space above the dining room, which had enough structural integrity to hold weight if you knew where to step. 1 behind the bar. 1 in the kitchen framework, which had 3 positions with sight lines into the dining room through the pass-through gap. He put 2 more people outside, but 1 on the north approach, 1 on the south, both with radios and instructions about the signal. The signal was Aaliyah's right hand going to her left collarbone, not a gesture she'd normally make. specific enough that it couldn't happen accidentally. She practiced it in her apartment mirror Tuesday night until it was in her muscle memory rather than her conscious thought. CJ wanted to be inside the building. Do-yoon told him no, and then Aaliyah told him no, and then he sat with both of those no's for a long time before agreeing to take a position in the car on the south approach with two men and a direct radio line to the team inside. "You're not going to be able to hear everything," Aaliyah said. "Do-yoon will relay." "It's not going to be clean," she said, "whatever happens in there. It's not going to go exactly the way we've planned it." "I know. And you're going to hear things that are going to make you want to come in before the signal." "Yes," he said. "Don't." He looked at her. "The signal is the signal," she said. "Not before." "Aaliyah, not before," she said. "Because if you come in early and Rusk doesn't have enough on tape to use against him, we've done all of this for a confrontation that resolves nothing. It has to be enough. I have to get enough." He looked at her for a long time. "The device is in the button of your jacket," he said, "second from the top." "I know." "If it gets physically separated from you." "I know," she said. He reached out and adjusted the collar of her jacket, just slightly, a small, precise movement. And then his hands came away, and he stepped back and looked at her with something in his face that she didn't have time to process right now and filed away for later. "Come back," he said. It wasn't a command. She recognized the difference. "I intend to," she said. Wednesday came down cold and clear, the kind of night that has no moisture in it, where sound carries farther than usual and your breath shows up white in front of your face, and the city looks sharper than it does in any other season. She took a car to Brooklyn, not a car connected to CJ's operation, a regular car service she'd ordered from her own phone, and she sat in the back seat and looked out at the bridge lights on the water and ran the conversation in her mind one more time. She needed 3 things from Rusk. She needed him to confirm his intent, specifically, to connect himself to the planned action against CJ's operation in language clear enough to be useful. She needed him to connect Terrence to the stalking, which meant getting Terrence talking about what he'd done in a context where the recording would hold. She needed it before anyone figured out what was happening. 3 things. She'd built careers on less. The car dropped her 2 blocks from Fiorentino's at 8:50. She walked the 2 blocks in the specific way she'd learned to walk in places that required awareness. Not hurried, not slow, aware of everything without showing that she was. The door to Fiorentino's was unlocked from outside. She pushed it open and went in. The dining room smelled of old grease and plaster dust, and the particular cold that builds up in spaces that haven't been heated in years. The tables were there, some of them on their sides, others still upright. The bar was intact along the left wall, bottles long gone, the shelving still up. What ambient light came through the boarded windows was enough to see the space without being enough to feel safe in it. There were 3 people in the room. Terrence was standing near the bar. His posture was the posture of a man performing confidence for an audience, shoulders back, chin up, trying to look like he belonged in whatever was happening. The second man was seated at one of the remaining upright tables near the center of the room. He was in his mid-40s, solidly built, with the particular quality of stillness that comes from very long practice at being the most dangerous person in a room. He had on a dark coat, and his hands were visible on the table, and he was looking at her with the flat, evaluative attention of someone pricing livestock. Gideon Rusk. She'd seen one photograph of him in Do-yoon's files. The photograph had been accurate. The third person was a man she didn't know, standing near the kitchen pass-through with his arms folded, watching the room. Security. She registered his position and filed it. She walked to the table and sat down across from Rusk without being invited, because she'd decided before she came in that she was not going to wait for permissions. "Miss Monroe?" Rusk said. His voice was lower than she'd expected. Deliberate. "Mr. Rusk," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Not hostile. Assessing. "You made specific demands about the location," he said. "I don't like basements," she said, "or warehouses. Personal preference." Something in his expression registered this as either amusement or approval. She wasn't certain which, and it didn't matter. "Terrence tells me you've decided to be reasonable," he said. "Terrence told you I'm scared," she said, "which is different." A small pause. "Is there a difference?" he said. "There is," she said. "Scared people cooperate because they don't see another option. Reasonable people cooperate because they've done the math. She kept her voice even, her hands on the table where he could see them. I've done the math. Tell me what you've calculated, he said. I've calculated that Kwon Si-jae is going to be a problem for me eventually, regardless of whether I do anything. I've calculated that you're building something and that you're going to build it whether I'm involved or not. And I've calculated that the only version of this where I come out with anything is the version where I'm useful to you before the whole thing goes sideways. Rusk looked at her. You're smarter than Terrence described, he said. Most people are, she said. Terrence shifted near the bar. She didn't look at him. What do you actually have? Rusk said. His Thursday meeting, she said. The external contact. I know who it is, and I know the relocated venue. CJ moved it on Monday. Changed the location through his internal system because he's gotten careful lately. She let a small, controlled pause land. I saw the updated information when I was in his office Tuesday evening. I have the address. She did not give him the address yet. He looked at her. Why would he have you in his office with access to that kind of scheduling information? He said. Because he's not as careful about me as he should be, she said. Because he thinks I'm uncomplicated. She held Rusk's eyes. People have been making that mistake my whole life. Rusk was quiet for a moment. The man by the pass-through hadn't moved. She was aware of him the way you're aware of a sound that might be something or might be nothing, continuously, without looking directly. If I give you the address, she said, I need something in return, not money. I need distance. I need to know that when whatever you're planning happens, I'm not in the building and I'm not connected to it. That's manageable, Rusk said. I need to hear you say that it's manageable in a way I can trust, she said. Because I've had men tell me things were manageable before and discovered later that manageable meant manageable for them. He looked at her steadily. What do you want me to say? He said. I want you to tell me what Thursday looks like from your end, she said. Not the version you're telling Terrence, the actual plan. A silence. She held it. She'd learned years ago that the person who spoke first in a silence like this was the person who found it less comfortable, and she had trained herself, through years of difficult tables and difficult men, to find silence very comfortable indeed. Rusk leaned back slightly. Thursday, he said, is the end of Kwon Si-jae's operation as a functional organization. The external contact he's meeting is a supply chain associate who moves product through 3 of his primary routes. If the meeting is disrupted at the right moment, with the right people present, what gets documented will be enough to collapse the legal structure of everything he's built. He paused. The violent component is a contingency, not a plan. I'm a businessman, Ms. Monroe. I prefer documentation to bodies. She noted he hadn't said no bodies. She noted the word contingency. And CJ personally, she said. Kwon Si-jae personally will be at that meeting, Rusk said. He always attends external contact meetings, which means whatever happens to his operation happens with him present. There it was. She kept her face exactly as it was. And Terrence, she said. She looked at him for the first time since she'd sat down. He was watching her with an expression she recognized, the specific expression of a man who thinks the woman in the room is performing for him and has no idea she's performing for someone else entirely. What's his role in Thursday? Terrence has been instrumental in establishing the access points that make Thursday possible, Rusk said. His surveillance work over the past several weeks, the information he's developed regarding your connection to Kwon's operation. Tell her, Terrence said from the bar. Rusk looked at him. Tell her what I've been doing, Terrence said. There was something in his voice now, a need for the acknowledgement, the specific vanity of a man who wants credit. She needs to know this was serious, that I put in real work. Rusk looked at Terrence for a moment with an expression Aaliyah recognized as the look of someone calculating what a piece of equipment costs versus what it's worth. Terrence has been watching Noir Han since November, Rusk said, documenting schedules, identifying access patterns, photographing individuals entering and leaving. He identified you as a contact point and has been working to leverage that relationship. Since November, she said. Yes. She looked at Terrence. You were watching me since November, she said. I was watching the building, he said. I didn't know you worked there until December. And when you found out? I saw the opportunity, he said. He said it like it was reasonable, like he was explaining a business decision. I'm not going to apologize for being strategic. You followed me, she said, for months. You showed up at my job. You called me from blocked numbers. You put your hand on my wrist in a diner and told me I didn't have a choice. He looked at her with something that was almost irritation, the frustration of a person who feels they're being mischaracterized. I was trying to get your attention, he said. That's stalking, Terrence. That's a strong word. It's the legal word, she said. It's the word that results in charges and convictions and sentences. A silence. Something shifted in the room. Not dramatic, small, like a temperature change that happens slowly enough that you don't notice it until it's already different. Rusk was looking at her differently now. She felt it. The security man near the pass-through had straightened slightly. She had maybe 15 seconds before Rusk's instincts, which had kept him operational long enough to sit across from her in this room, connected the dots she'd been drawing. She put her hand to her left collarbone. The room exploded. Not with gunfire, with bodies in motion, from above the ceiling tiles, a crash of movement, and suddenly two of Do-yoon's people were dropping into the dining room through the grid framework, landing on the table beside Rusk, one of them with a hand already going to the man's coat. From behind the bar, the third person rising with a clear voice saying, "Nobody moves, hands where I can see them." From the pass-through, the fourth, coming through the gap in the framework, with the specific purposeful movement of someone who has been waiting to move for a long time and is now done waiting. Terrence bolted. He was across the room and at the door before anyone had fully processed his direction, and then he was through it, and the cold outside came in through the opening, and for 1 second, the room reorganized itself around that absence. Si-jae came through the door 16 seconds after the signal. She counted. He came in fast, and he came in with 2 men behind him, and his eyes went to her first, a single direct look that asked the question without words, and she answered it by not moving, by sitting exactly where she was, because she was fine and the look said fine, and he read it and moved. Rusk had not moved during any of this. He was sitting with Do-yoon's man beside him, and his hands on the table, and his face had settled into an expression that was careful and specific. Not panic, not anger, but the expression of a man performing a rapid calculation about his remaining options. He looked at Aaliyah. "Clever," he said. "You said I was smarter than Terrence described," she said. "I did." He looked at the device she was now holding in her hand. She'd unclipped it from the jacket button, because there was no reason not to. "How much of it?" "All of it," she said. "From when I sat down." He looked at the device for a moment. Then he looked at Si-jae, who was standing 3 feet away with the specific stillness of someone who has arrived at a place they've been moving toward for a long time. "Kwon," Rusk said. Si-jae said nothing. "This is a better play than I expected," Rusk said. "I'll give her that." He glanced at Aaliyah. "How much of what she told me was true? The Thursday meeting, the relocated venue." "The Thursday meeting was moved," Si-jae said, "to a location with 12 law enforcement personnel already in position. It was moved the moment we confirmed your people had been given the original location through Sung-jin." Rusk took that without visible reaction. "Sung-jin," he said, "is no longer a consideration for either of us," Si-jae said. Outside, through the open door, Aaliyah heard sounds, running, voices, the specific organized noise of multiple people converging on a position, Do-yoon's outer perimeter closing in. And something else, the unmistakable sound of law enforcement, which had been Do-yoon's other arrangement, the one Si-jae had agreed to when she'd said legally and he'd said all right. She heard Terrence before she saw him. He'd made it 40 yards from the door before the 2 men on the south approach had come out of position, and the third from the north had cut off his angle. And he'd done what cornered men do, which was to find the corner and then be surprised that it was a corner. He came back through the door with his hands up and his face doing something complicated. Not surrender exactly, not yet, but the preliminary process of arriving at surrender. He looked at Aaliyah. She looked back at him. "You set this up," he said. "Yes," she said. "The whole thing. The call back. The meeting." "Yes." He looked at her the way he used to look at her when she'd done something he hadn't anticipated. Not quite anger, but a species of frustrated disbelief. The expression of a man confronting the fact that he'd fundamentally misread something he thought he understood. "You were never scared," he said. She considered that. "I was scared," she said. The whole time. I just stopped letting it make the decisions." He looked at her for another moment. Then something in his face broke down into something smaller and less performed, and for just a second she saw the thing underneath the thing. Not remorse exactly, but the exhausted recognition of a person who has been wrong in a way that cannot be walked back. It didn't change anything. She looked away first. Si-jae was watching the door where the first law enforcement personnel were coming through. 2 detectives, one in plain clothes, one she recognized as the contact Do-yoon had been working with for the past week. A woman named Carver, who had the specific bearing of someone who had been working this case from a direction that had run parallel to theirs for longer than any of them had realized. Detective Carver looked at the room. She looked at Rusk. She looked at Terrence. She looked at Aaliyah last, and the look was brief and specific and contained something that was almost acknowledgement. "Miss Monroe," she said. "Detective," Aaliyah said. "We'll need the recording." Aaliyah handed over the device. Then she stood up from the table. She'd been sitting this whole time, she realized, while everything had reorganized itself around her. And there was something right about that, something that felt like the correct image. And she walked to the door and stood in it and looked out at the waterfront. Red Hook at 9:30 on a Wednesday in January. The water was black, and the lights of the harbor were reflected in it in long broken lines. And the cold was the same cold it always was, indifferent to what had just happened in the building behind her. She heard CJ behind her. He stopped beside her. Not close, not touching. Just present in the specific way he was present, which was with the full weight of himself rather than a managed portion of it. "You got all of it," he said. "Most of it," she said. "Enough." Rusk connected himself to Thursday. "On tape," she said. And Terrence admitted the surveillance, the stalking, on tape, in front of witnesses. She paused. "Do you think Carver's case is strong enough?" "If she's been building it as long as Do-yoon thinks she has, yes," CG said. "Our tape fills the gap she's been missing, the intent and the operational specifics in his own voice." She nodded. She looked at the water for a moment. "Sung-jin," she said. "He's out of the city," CJ said. "By the time this is processed, he'll be far enough out that what he knows about our operation is stale." A pause. "He'll have to live with what he did. I've decided that's enough." She turned and looked at him. "You decided that?" "Yes. Not because I asked you to." He looked at her. "Because you were right," he said, "and because I'm done inheriting decisions made a long time ago by people who didn't think about what they cost." She held his eyes for a moment. Behind them, the sounds of the room were procedural now. The organized noise of law enforcement doing its work, the specific language of rights being read, documents requested, positions established. The noise of things being put through their proper process. "We should go back in," she said. "Yes," he said. Neither of them moved immediately. "CJ," she said. "Yes." "When this is done. When the statements are given and the process is running." She looked at the water one more time. "I need about a week." "For what?" he said. "To figure out what I actually feel," she said. "Without the emergency. Without the forward motion." She paused. "Because I've been running toward something for 3 months, and I don't know yet whether what I find when I stop is something I'm ready for." He was quiet for a moment. "Take what you need," he said. "I'm not asking permission," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm telling you I'll still be there when you're done with the week." She looked at him. There was nothing managed in his expression, nothing performed. He was simply standing in the cold outside a building in Red Hook at 9:30 at night, telling her a true thing and waiting to see what she did with it. She turned back toward the door. "Come on," she said. "Carver needs the timeline." They went back inside. Terrence was sitting at one of the bolted-down tables with his wrists in restraints and his face doing the work of a man constructing a narrative he can live with. He watched Aaliyah walk back in, and he watched her sit down across from Detective Carver, and he watched her begin the methodical, clear, entirely composed process of giving her account. The timeline, the voicemails, the diner, the recording, everything in the correct sequence without embellishment or hedge. He watched her like she was someone he didn't recognize. She didn't look at him while she talked. She looked at Carver, and she said the things that needed to be said, and her voice was steady, and she did not perform being fine. She just was, in the way that people are when they've moved through something rather than around it. in the way that survival sometimes looks from the outside like composure, but is actually something harder and less photogenic than composure. She was almost through the timeline when Rusk, from across the room, spoke for the first time since Carver's people had come through the door. "Miss Monroe," he said. She stopped. She looked at him. Carver looked at him. "For what it's worth," he said, "you were the best played piece on this board." She looked at him for a moment. "I wasn't a piece," she said. Then she turned back to Carver and continued where she'd left off. And Gideon Rusk did not speak again that evening. Outside the window, the harbor was doing what harbors do, taking in the city's light and breaking it apart and giving it back in pieces. Each piece smaller and less whole than the original, but still recognizably light. Still recognizably something that had come from somewhere real and was going somewhere real, moving in the dark water with the patient indifference of things that have been moving long before anyone was watching and will keep moving long after the watching stops. The night was not over, but the part she'd feared most was behind her now. What lay ahead was harder to name, and therefore, she was beginning to understand, harder to run from. The statements took 3 hours. Aaliyah sat across from Detective Carver at one of Fiorentino's bolted-down tables and gave her account in the specific, methodical way she'd learned to give accounts of things. Starting at the beginning, not the emotional beginning, but the factual one. The first voicemail, the first sighting of the SUV, the diner in Astoria, the recording. Carver listened without interrupting except to clarify sequence, and she wrote in a notebook with a pen that was running low on ink and scratched audibly on every upstroke. Rusk was processed first and taken out. He walked through the door without looking back, which told Aaliyah something about the kind of man he was. Not the kind who needed a final look, not the kind who required the moment to mean something. He was already calculating the next position before he'd cleared the threshold. Terrence was processed second. He looked at her when they walked him out. She'd known he would. She met it, held it for a moment, not with warmth and not with anger, but with the specific quality of someone who has finished something and set it down and is no longer carrying it. He looked away first. The door closed behind him. She sat in the cold dining room of a burned restaurant in Red Hook until 11:15, and then Carver told her she was free to go and gave her a card with a direct number and told her she'd be in contact within 48 hours about the formal deposition. CJ drove her home. She didn't ask him to. He didn't offer. I was simply beside her when she walked out of the building, and the car was on the south end of the block, and neither of them said anything about it. The drive from Red Hook to Queens took 40 minutes at that hour. She sat in the passenger seat and looked at the city through the window. The bridges, the water, the specific way New York looks from a moving car at night, which is like something enormous and indifferent that has been running without interruption for a long time and will continue running without interruption, regardless of what any individual person does inside it. She didn't talk. CJ didn't push. When the car stopped outside her building in Queens, she sat for a moment before she opened the door. "Thank you," she said. "Yes," he said. She got out. She went inside. She went to her room and sat on her bed in her coat for about 10 minutes, and then she took her coat off and hung it up and got into bed and was asleep before she'd finished the thought she'd started. She slept for 11 hours. She woke up to gray light and the sound of the radiator and the distant conversation of the city outside her window, and she lay in bed and looked at the ceiling for a long time and felt the specific quality of the morning after something large. Not relief exactly, not peace, but the strange emptiness that comes when you've been running toward a fixed point for so long that arriving feels like falling. She called Dana. Dana came over that afternoon with takeout containers from the Thai place on Jamaica Avenue, and they sat on Aaliyah's bed because the apartment didn't have room for 2 people and a meal at the same time without creative use of furniture, and Aaliyah told her most of it. Not all. Enough. Dana listened the way Dana always listened, without performing shock, without the specific kind of concern that is really about the listener's own feelings rather than the speaker's. She ate her pad see and she asked questions that were actually questions rather than reactions wearing question marks. And when Aaliyah was done, she was quiet for a moment. "You okay?" Dana said. "I don't know yet," Aaliyah said. "That's a more honest answer than most people would give." "I'm tired of dishonest answers," Aaliyah said. "Even the kind you tell yourself." Dana looked at her for a moment. "What do you want to do?" she said. "Not about him, not about any of it. Just, what do you want?" Aaliyah thought about it. I want to finish what I started, she said. The hospitality program. I've been going part-time for 2 semesters and I keep treating it like a backup plan instead of a plan. She paused. And I want to stay at the restaurant, not because of him, because I'm good at what I do there and I've built something in that place and I'm done walking away from things I've built. Dana nodded. And him, she said, not pushing, just leaving the space. I told him I needed a week, Aaliyah said. Is a week enough? I don't know, she said, but it's what I asked for, so it's what I'm taking. The week was not quiet. It was full in the particular way that weeks are full when the administrative aftermath of a crisis intersects with ordinary life. Phone calls from Carver's office, a preliminary hearing she wasn't required to attend but whose dates she tracked, a conversation with the legal aid lawyer Dana had connected her with, who reviewed the recording and told her, with the specific restrained enthusiasm of legal professionals, that it was extremely good. She went to her hospitality management class on Thursday evening for the first time in 3 weeks. The instructor was a woman in her 50s who ran a hotel group out of Long Island and taught the certification course because, she'd said in the first session, she wanted the next generation of hospitality managers to actually understand the industry rather than just pass a test. Aaliyah sat in the 3rd row and took notes and felt, for the first time in longer than she could precisely identify, like someone building towards something rather than away from something. She did not go to Noir Han that week. She thought about it. She missed it, which surprised her. Not Si-jae specifically, but the work itself, the specific rhythm of a service shift, the satisfaction of a section run well, the thing that happened in her body when the work was clicking and she was moving efficiently through a full floor. She had not understood until she didn't have it how much of her sense of herself had gotten built around the job. She sent Paul a text on Wednesday saying she'd be back Monday. Paul responded with a single thumbs up, which was exactly the right response. On Friday, Do-yoon called her. She almost didn't answer. Then she answered. I wanted to tell you before you heard it through other channels, he said. The DA's office filed charges this morning. Rusk, conspiracy, extortion, organized criminal activity, several counts going back further than Thursday. They've been building for 8 months. What you recorded gave them the current operational evidence they needed to move. He paused. Maddox is charged separately. Stalking, criminal harassment, conspiracy, 2 counts of extortion. The DA's office believes the stalking charges alone carry enough for a substantial sentence given the prior incidents. She sat down. Okay, she said. The preliminary hearing for Maddox is in 6 weeks. You'll likely be asked to testify at trial if it goes that far. I know, she said. I already talked to a lawyer. A pause. Ms. Monroe, Do-yoon said. He said it in the register that told her he was about to say something he'd thought about before saying, I was wrong about you. In the beginning, I thought... He stopped. I thought you were a complication. I was a complication, she said. No, he said. You were the clearest thing in a situation that had gotten very unclear. I wanted to tell you that. She was quiet for a moment. Thank you, Do-yoon, she said. She hung up and sat with the phone in her hands and looked at the middle distance for a while. And what she was looking at, though she wouldn't have named it this way, was the distance between who she'd been in October and who she was right now, and whether the distance was far enough to mean what she wanted it to mean. She went back to Noir Han on Monday. She came in through the employee's entrance at 10:20, same as always, went to her locker, tied on her apron. Ji-young was already there and looked at her and said nothing for about 30 seconds, and then said, I made you coffee. It's at the station. Thank you, Aaliyah said. Welcome back, Ji-young said. The shift was ordinary. That was the thing about ordinary. It returned. She'd half expected the restaurant to feel different, to carry some residue of everything that had happened in and around it. It didn't. It was a restaurant. It was a well-run, well-designed restaurant with good food and good lighting and a clientele that expected excellence and received it. And it went about its business with the particular institutional indifference of places that have been well-run for long enough that they don't need any individual person's drama to function. She ran her section. She took her tables. She brought people things they needed before they knew they needed them. Si-jae was in the restaurant by noon. She was aware of it in the way she was always aware of it, the ambient shift, the attention in the room that adjusted. She didn't look toward his office. She finished her floor work and clocked out at 3 and got her coat from her locker and went to the hallway. And then, because she had decided something in the week she'd taken that she had not explicitly articulated until right now. She stopped outside his office door. She knocked. "Come in," he said. She opened the door but didn't go inside. She stood in the doorway with her coat over her arm and looked at him across the room. He was at his desk. He had a laptop open and papers to one side and a coffee that had probably gone cold an hour ago, and he looked at her with the particular quality of attention he'd always given her. Full, still, nothing managed about it. "I came back," she said. "I see that," he said. "Not because of you," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I came back because this is my job, and I'm good at it, and I've decided to stop treating things I've built as expendable." "I know," he said. "But I also came back because I wanted to see you," she said. "And I'm telling you that directly instead of pretending it's just about the job, because I'm done pretending things are other than what they are." He looked at her. "What does that mean?" he said. "It means I don't know what this is," she said. "I don't know what you are to me or what I am to you with any clarity, and I'm not going to perform certainty I don't have, but I'm also not going to keep running from the question." She paused. "I've been running from things for 3 months. I'm tired of it." "What do you want?" he said. "I want to figure it out slowly," she said, "without pressure and without a timeline, and without either of us deciding what the other person needs." "I can do that," he said. "I know you think you can," she said. "What I need to know is whether you actually can, because there's a version of you that wants to manage things, including me, and that version of you and I are not going to work." He was quiet for a moment. "The version of me that wants to manage things," he said, "has been losing arguments consistently for the past several months." He looked at her steadily. "I'm not going to tell you it's gone. It's not. But I'm aware of it in a way I wasn't before, and aware is the beginning of something different." She held his eyes. "Okay," she said. She went home. She did not know, walking to the bus stop in the January afternoon, whether what she was building was the right thing or a complicated thing, or both simultaneously. She suspected both simultaneously, because that was what things generally were when they were real rather than performed. What she knew was that she was making a choice, and that the making of the choice was different from anything that had come before it. Not because the choice was uncomplicated, but because she was making it fully awake. The weeks after that moved with the particular rhythm of time when things are changing but slowly, when the large events have resolved, and what remains is the smaller, harder work of deciding who you're going to be on the other side of them. The formal deposition came in February. Aaliyah sat across a table from 2 assistant district attorneys in an office in Lower Manhattan and gave her account in full, the same account she'd given Carver, but more detailed now, with the specific legal precision the process required. She had her lawyer beside her. She did not need the lawyer to tell her what to say, but she found it useful to have a person in the room who was professionally committed to her interests, which was a new experience and one she intended to maintain. The recording was entered into evidence. The ADA reviewing it described it afterward, in a conversation with Carver that Carver later described to Aaliyah as one of the cleanest pieces of operational evidence she'd seen in a case of this type. Aaliyah thanked Carver and went back to work. She finished the hospitality management certification in March. The final exam was on a Thursday evening, and she sat at a table in a classroom on the 2nd floor of a community college building in Long Island City and worked through it with the specific methodical attention she brought to things that mattered. She handed it in 15 minutes before the end of the period. She got her coat and walked to the train and did not find out her grade until the following Monday, when the instructor emailed her with the score and a note that said, in the restrained language of educators who have learned not to oversell things, that her answers on the operations management section had been the strongest in the cohort. She sat at the kitchen table in her room in Queens and read the email twice. Then she sat very still for a moment with her hands on the table and felt the specific weight of the thing she'd done. Not dramatic, not cinematic, but real in hers and not taken from her. She forwarded it to Dana. Dana's response was 3 words and a string of exclamation points that Aaliyah found, for once, entirely appropriate. The trial for Terrence Maddox began in April. She had been preparing for it since February. Her lawyer had walked her through what to expect, the questions, the cross-examination, the specific and deliberate work of defense attorneys to find inconsistencies in testimony, not because the inconsistencies disprove the facts, but because they create enough uncertainty in the minds of jurors to accomplish their purposes. She understood the process. She had prepared for the process. What she had not fully prepared for was walking into the courtroom and seeing him. Not because she was afraid of him. She'd arrived at the other side of afraid during the course of the previous months. And what she felt when she saw Terrence Maddox sitting at the defense table in a suit she recognized as the one he'd bought for a cousin's wedding 3 years ago was something more complicated and less actionable than fear. Something in the neighborhood of grief. Not for him, not for what they'd been, but for the time she'd lost, for the version of herself she'd had to dismantle in order to survive, for the years of her 20s that had gone toward managing someone else's instability instead of building something of her own. She let herself feel it for approximately 45 seconds in the hallway outside the courtroom. Then she went in. She took the stand and gave her testimony, and she did not look at Terrence while she gave it. She looked at the attorney asking the questions, or at the middle distance, or at the jury, 12 people who were doing the work of listening carefully, which she respected. She answered what was asked. She did not perform anything. She did not modulate her voice toward victimhood or toward anger or toward any of the registers that would make her testimony more or less sympathetic, because she had not come into the courtroom to be sympathetic. She had come to say what had happened. The cross-examination took 40 minutes. The defense attorney was a woman in her late 40s who was very good at her job, which Aaliyah had been told to expect and had expected. She asked about inconsistencies in the timeline, about Aaliyah's connection to Si-jae, about the recording and the circumstances under which it was made. She asked, in several different ways and from several different angles, whether Aaliyah had been acting as an agent of a criminal organization when she obtained the evidence. Aaliyah answered each question the same way, directly, without elaboration, without being baited into defensiveness. I was acting for myself, she said, when the question came in its most direct form. Every decision I made in that building was mine. I was not directed, compensated, or coerced by anyone. I went into that building to obtain evidence of crimes being committed against me specifically. That is what I did. The defense attorney looked at her for a moment. Then she said no further questions and sat down. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Aaliyah was not in this courthouse when the verdict came through. She was at work. She got the call from her lawyer at 2:15 on a Tuesday afternoon, and she was standing at the service station refilling salt shakers when her phone buzzed and she stepped into the hallway and listened to her lawyer say the words she'd been waiting to hear since October. Guilty on all counts. She stood in the hallway for a moment, then she went back to the floor and finished refilling the salt shakers. Ji-young looked at her face when she came back out. Good news or bad news? Ji-young said. Good, Aaliyah said. Ji-young nodded and went back to what she was doing, and Aaliyah finished her side work and ran her section and did not cry until she was on the bus home, which was the right place to do it. Not from devastation, not from relief, but from the specific release that comes when something you've been bracing against for months finally resolves, and your body, which has been holding itself together in preparation, is allowed to stop. She let herself have the bus ride. She was done by the time she got to her stop. Rusk's trial was separate and later, a federal case that moved on the deliberate, grinding timetable of federal prosecutions. She was not a primary witness there. The case rested on 8 months of Carver's investigation and the operational evidence the recording had supplied. She was kept informed by Carver, who turned out to be the kind of detective who believed in the people who contributed to her cases, knowing how those cases resolved. When the federal conviction came through in June, Carver called her personally. 32 years, Carver said. Conspiracy, extortion, organized crime statutes. His attorneys will appeal, but the recording makes it very difficult. Thank you for calling, Aaliyah said. Thank you for the recording, Carver said. There was something dry and sincere simultaneously in the way she said it, which was the manner of a person who had seen a lot and had learned to hold appreciation and weariness at the same time, without letting either one cancel the other out. Summer came to New York the way it always came, without asking, without apology, turning the city into a different version of itself almost overnight. The restaurant got busy in the way that restaurants in Midtown got busy in summer, with the particular combination of tourists and business visitors and locals who'd given up cooking, and Aaliyah moved through it with the efficiency and ease of someone who had been doing this long enough that it was part of the rhythm of her body rather than an effort imposed upon it. Paul announced in July that he was leaving, an opportunity in Chicago, a management position at a hotel group, The kind of move that made sense for him and that he'd been building toward for 2 years. He gave 6 weeks' notice. He thanked the staff individually, which was characteristic of him. CJ called Aaliyah into his office on a Thursday morning. She came in and sat down, which she did now without thinking about it. "Paul's leaving," he said. "I know. I'm looking at his replacement." "Okay," she said. She waited. He looked at her. "You finished the certification in March," he said. "You knew about that." "Yes." She looked at him. "You looked at my transcript," she said. "I looked at whether you'd completed it," he said, "because I've been waiting to have this conversation." She was quiet. "The general manager position," he said. "It's yours if you want it, not as a gift. Not because of anything other than the fact that you've earned it and you're the best person for the job." He held her eyes. "But I want to be clear about something. You would be reporting to me in a professional capacity. That's real, and it has weight, and I need you to know I've thought about it." "So have I," she said. And I can keep those things separate," she said, "because I know the difference between what I've built here professionally and what's separate from that. The question is whether you can." "I believe I can," he said. "You believe," she said. "That's a careful word." "It's the honest word," he said. "I'm not going to tell you I'm certain about something I'm still learning, but I'm aware of the distinction, and I'm committed to maintaining it." She sat with that for a moment. "I want the position," she said, "on the merits, not as a favor." "On the merits," he said. "Then yes," she said. She stood up. "One more thing," she said from the doorway. He looked at her. "What happened with the operations?" she said. "The ones you were going to restructure." She'd been watching for the past several months without asking directly. "I've seen things change. The logistics company. Some of the contact patterns Do-yoon manages." CJ was quiet for a moment. "It's not finished," he said. "What I built took 15 years. Dismantling the parts that need dismantling isn't a month's work." He paused. "But the Thursday meeting that Rusk wanted to disrupt, the external contact, that was the last one. I ended the supply chain relationship the week after Red Hook." She looked at him. "What does that cost you?" she said. "A significant portion of what made certain people consider me worth dealing with," he said. "Which also means a significant portion of what made certain people consider me worth threatening. You're not going to pretend that's a comfortable trade." "No," he said. "It's not comfortable. It's right." He looked at her steadily. "Those are different things, and I've spent most of my life confusing them." She stood in the doorway for a moment. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. She went back to the floor. She did not make the mistake of thinking this was simple. She had enough experience with the distance between what people said they were doing and what they were actually doing to maintain the specific healthy skepticism of someone who had been burned by optimism before. She watched. She paid attention. She looked at the patterns of what changed and what didn't over the months that followed. What she found was imperfect. Do-yoon's operation didn't vanish, the organization didn't dissolve into legitimate enterprise overnight, and she had enough realism about human institutions to know that anything built over 15 years wasn't going to unbuild itself cleanly or completely. There were things she didn't know, and things she suspected, and things she'd decided were not hers to adjudicate. What she did know was what she saw. The logistics company changed its contracts. The Flushing Hotel, which had been the centerpiece of the financial structure Rusk had been investigating, went through a formal restructuring that she heard about through Do-yoon, and which had the specific fingerprints of someone engaging actual lawyers rather than people who managed legal risk through other means. CJ was not becoming a different person. He was becoming a more honest version of the same one. She thought that might be enough. She was not yet certain. They ate dinner together the first time in late August, at a restaurant neither of them worked at, which had been her specific condition stated plainly. She had not wanted the first time to be at Noir Han, not because there was anything wrong with Noir Han, but because she needed it to be in neutral territory, a place where neither of them had authority, where the only thing either of them was doing was sitting across from another person and eating food and talking. They talked for 3 hours, not about the organization, not about Rusk or Terrence or any of the months that had built to this. They talked about other things. His father, who had come to New York at 24 with almost nothing and built a restaurant with money he'd borrowed from 6 different people and paid back over 12 years. Her mother, who had worked 2 jobs through Aaliyah's childhood and never once described it as a sacrifice, which was either the most generous thing a parent could do or a kind of emotional avoidance she was still working out. Baltimore in summer, Seoul in winter, which he described in a way that made it sound like a city that took itself very seriously. The specific loneliness of building things in a city that doesn't care whether you build them. She walked home instead of taking a car because the August night was warm enough and she wanted the time. On the walk, she thought about a January night in a snowstorm when she'd pounded on a glass door and said, "Please don't lock me out," to a man she didn't know, and how that moment had seemed at the time like the low point. The moment when she'd been so stripped down by circumstances that she was begging for basic shelter from a stranger. She thought about it differently now. She thought it might have been the first time in years that she'd asked for exactly what she needed without dressing it in something else. The fall came. The restaurant moved into the particular rhythm of fall in New York, which was a good rhythm for restaurants. The weather drove people inside. The city got serious again after summer's looseness. The reservation book filled up. She ran the floor with the authority of someone who had earned the position and knew they'd earned it, which was different from running it with the authority of someone who needed to prove they'd earned it. And the difference was perceptible in how the staff responded. Ji-young came to her in October with a staffing problem she'd solved incorrectly, and Aaliyah told her how she'd solved it incorrectly and how to fix it, and Ji-young went and fixed it, and that was the whole interaction. No drama, no loss of face, no one diminished. That was the work. She talked to her mother more that fall. Her mother lived in Baltimore in the same house Aaliyah had grown up in, and their relationship was the complicated kind. Not damaged, not warm in any uncomplicated way, but real and durable in the way that relationships are when they've survived the particular stress test of two people who are very similar pretending, for years, that they are not. Her mother asked about her life in New York with the careful obliqueness of a woman who believed in privacy as a kind of love. Aaliyah told her more than she usually did. Not everything. Enough. Her mother was quiet for a moment after and then said, "Are you safe?" "Yes," Aaliyah said. "I am." "And you're okay?" "I'm better than okay," Aaliyah said. "I'm building something." Her mother made a sound that was not quite agreement and not quite skepticism, the specific maternal sound of someone who has seen their child build things before and knows that building things is both the right answer and not the complete answer. "All right," her mother said. "Come visit," Aaliyah said. A pause. "Maybe in the spring." It was the most her mother had committed to anything in years. She hung up and stood in the small office that was now her office, Paul's office, before, now hers, with her certification on the wall in a frame she'd bought at a place on Jamaica Avenue for $14, because $14 was the right amount to spend on a frame when you're buying it for yourself. And she felt something she didn't immediately name. She named it eventually. It was continuity. The feeling of being in a place she'd chosen, doing work she'd chosen, inside a life that was still imperfect and still complicated and still had things in it she hadn't fully resolved, and being okay with all of that, not because the complications had resolved, but because she was no longer running from them. January came around again. She noted when the anniversary arrived the way you note dates that have weight, not with ceremony, not with excessive feeling, but with the acknowledgement that some days are different from other days, and it's reasonable to know which ones they are. The night of the anniversary, she was the last one in the restaurant. She finished the closing procedures the way she'd finished them 100 times. The counts, the locks, the systems, the walkthrough of the dining room that she'd developed her own sequence for, different from Paul's, more thorough in the kitchen, less thorough in the front because she'd realized the front could handle itself. She put on her coat in the small office and picked up her bag and turned off the desk lamp and went to the employee's entrance. CJ was standing in the hallway. He was in his coat, which meant he'd come down from the upper office rather than still being in the building on work. He was holding his keys. He was not performing anything. Not significance, not romance, not the self-consciousness of a person who has staged a moment. He was simply there. "I was going to walk out with you," he said, "if that's okay." She looked at him. A year ago, she had stood on the other side of this door in a snowstorm, with her hands barely functional and her voice smaller than she intended, and said, "Please don't lock me out." And the man on the other side had unlocked the door and let her in, and that had been the beginning of something she hadn't understood yet. She understood it better now. Not completely. You never understood things completely when the things were real. She reached into her coat pocket and took out her key. You know I don't need you to let me in anymore, she said. He looked at her. Something in his face was very still and very present and not managed at all. I know, he said. That's why it means something when you choose to come inside. She looked at him for a moment, long enough to be sure she was looking clearly, without the distortions of fear or need or the specific confusion of gratitude and feeling that she'd spent months carefully separating. She unlocked the door herself. She pushed it open and the cold came in and the city was out there doing what it always did. Moving, indifferent, enormous, full of people making their own calculations about safety and risk and what it cost to stay and what it cost to leave. She stepped through the door. She waited one beat and then she reached back without looking and she took his hand. Not as a rescue, not as a surrender, not as two people who had saved each other from anything, because that wasn't what had happened. What had happened was that they had each saved themselves, separately, with the specific difficulty that real saving requires, the kind that doesn't look like saving while it's happening and only becomes legible afterward when you can see the distance you've traveled. What she took his hand as was a choice, a conscious, awake, uncoerced choice made by a woman who had learned the difference, made in a doorway in January in New York City on the anniversary of the night she'd stopped running and started something else that didn't have a clean name yet, but that she was no longer afraid of. She locked the door behind them. The restaurant stood on the other side of it, quiet and dark except for the security light, waiting for tomorrow. The way it always waited, steady, indifferent to drama, ready to do the work again. They walked out into the Manhattan winter together, the city loud and bright around them, neither of them speaking, both of them moving, the snow just beginning to fall. The way it had fallen a year ago, covering everything in the specific clean indifference of weather, making the city look, for a moment, like something that could be started fresh. Aaliyah Monroe pulled her coat tighter with her free hand. She did not look back at the door. She already knew it was locked. She had locked it herself.